Hello and welcome back to another time-lapse build of Ravenhill Castle. Last time we built this gatehouse and today we're going to be building this dragon temple. The first thing that we need to do at this point is level out the ground. I want this to be tiered, so what I'll also do is add a lower area of ground that's been leveled too. This will help it look larger and more grandeur without the use of excess iron beams. I then connected the outer wall so everything was on a similar grid and began to build the outer frame. Ideally, I want this to be covered as soon as possible, as it's going to be a pain to protect against the rain, especially for what I have planned as the centerpiece. I wanted the temple to stand out from the rest of the buildings, and I'm sure with the new build pieces from the Hearth and Home update will give us that. But for now, I wanted to keep the inside relatively plain, with the exception of a single centerpiece. The signature piece of art that I want is a really nice floor pattern, and this knotted circle that I've kind of done here looks pretty cool in my opinion, and under it I also placed the floor. This gave the knot a sense of depth when looking down, and I then have an outer raised floor framing it for people to gather around the center altar. Once done, I also added the outer frame to the temple. I love building these circular builds, but I would definitely recommend avoiding circular builds unless you're very comfortable with the build mechanics, as it is super difficult, especially when it comes to roofing. I then painstakingly slowly built upwards, tilting up to the top. At this point, the build reminded me of the Globe Theatre, so I wanted to move away from that and towards a cathedral main chamber, something that towers upwards and everyone looks to. I added small gaps for smoke. The original concept was actually that we have a bonfire in the middle, but this may change at a later stage. I also added the horizontal core wood beams in a spiral to add a bit of variety to the architecture, which you'll certainly see shortly. This also helped with the roofs not connecting properly by having tiered roofs. It certainly isn't perfect, but looks much better than it would have. With it being so high, I also needed to place a beam in the center of the build, and later on what I might try and do is to find a way around this so that the main chamber is open. Once done, I added a circular border at the top, and then continued to floor the roof, followed by roofing it. Now it doesn't look great here, but I then afterwards, outside of this recording, adjusted it to make it look better. I love at this point how the snow kind of settles on the top, and I may actually add some kind of religious symbol on the top later on. Inside this, I added the barrier and then began on the outer walls. I wanted lots of depth to really make it stand out from the rest of the castle. So once done, I was pretty happy with the way it looked. Better yet, it is actually now waterproof, which is super important with these storms. With the main chamber finished, I started working on the outer and lower sections, and I wanted the ability to enter the tombs underneath the main chamber, but this currently isn't possible in game. Perhaps later on, if we're lucky, this can be adapted for that. Regardless of what the lower section is to be used for though, I did want it to blend into the temple, so I kept working with the symmetry of the circle and wanted this all connected. This was then all roofed, walled and floored, and though the build took in excess of 10 hours to do, excluding resource collection, at this point I was very happy with how it was all coming along. At this point I needed to connect the gatehouse to the shrine or the temple, and I'm happy with the overall feel of the wall with the thatched roof, but for the ease of the build and also the military feel. Later on, I think I'll be using a much larger framework and make it much more straight-edged rather than flowing along the terrain. This will just speed up the whole process, as I want the key features of the castle to actually be the buildings within it rather than the walls themselves. Once the wall was connected, it was time to remove the scaffolding and also work on the garden part of the temple. So first things first, I needed to remove the other buildings. Though this is a military outpost, the community should have somewhere to feel that they can relax, or where the priest could collect the honey and fruits for various meads. And so this was super important for this build. Once again, at this point, the first step was to level out the ground so we had a blank canvas to work from. I then needed to work on the main entrance, including a little porch and walkway. I wanted this to be guarded by 4 pine trees which towered upwards with torches lit down the centre. I also added ladders to give this outer flower bed more presence. Now, as the trees were growing, I left the rest of the flower beds untouched, but as soon as the trees were fully grown, you'll actually see that I've planted some carrots and radishes to give them the flowers, the seeded flower look. My mission at this point was to give the castle inhabitants some escapism. It's important for me that this area is littered with flowers, and I hope in the future we'll have more flowers that we can add to our builds. At the far end, there is also a section of raspberry bushes. Now this will work perfectly with some beehives by the back entrance of the temple. Here I made 2 sections of the garden, a main garden where people could pass through to get to the second entrance, which would be surrounded by flowers, and then in the corner a second garden that housed the majority of the beehives. I even added a little iron gate to leave this area, and I am considering adding a small graveyard in this section. Once I was happy with the garden, I started working on the second section of wall and finished housing in the lower levels. Though this lower level blends nicely with the temple, it still feels very separated for me. So for the time being, this will be more of an observation section with the temple behind and above it. This actually gives us great views of the road up to the castle gate and also great views across the southern valley. Now I must admit that this isn't finished, and I think when the Hearth and Home update arrives, I'll work on the inside and more details to make it really stand out versus the rest of the buildings. overall, I'm very happy with how the castle is coming along. Anyway guys, that is all we have time for in this video. As I did mention, it took me many hours to get this far. But do let me know what you think of it, and also if you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe, as I intend to fully flesh out this castle. And also if you want, why not join me on Twitch on Saturdays, as I will be playing some Valheim later in the evening. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and also a huge shout out to all of our supporters, most notably our Solarclipse patrons, The Calamity, Trebor and Cerebral Tag, as well as our Lunar Eclipse patrons, Matt Lippard, Chris McCabe and Lord of July, as well as our Blood Moon of the Day, Kareev Johnny. Anyway guys, until next time, as always, ciao for now.